Welcome to the Arts and Oddities podcast with A.M. Hall, starring A.M. Hall. Now, here is A.M. Hall.
Welcome to Art and Oddities with A.M. Hall, where I talk about anything that strikes my fancy, to include all kinds of creative works, from children's cartoons to underground zines, to identity politics and everything in between. My guests and I will discuss how art impacts and reflects culture and counterculture, enables individualism and conformity, and have loads of fun along the way. I am your host, A.M. Hall, aka Anthony Bonafini, aka Galena Storm, aka Aquaces Mancuso. This episode, I tell you all about the Roman toga that I made. Then I finally have on someone I've mentioned on the podcast since the very beginning episode, Nix Eraticatus, where she tells me all about having been an actor in the film and her tips on writing horror. As an aside, if you enjoy listening to the podcast, please support my Patreon at patreon.com/panicbedlam. That's PANIKBEDLAM. Panic and I are looking to get some better quality microphones and make the entire podcast just sound all around better. But we can't do it without your help. One of the latest things that I've been working on is a traditional Roman toga for one of our actors to wear on screen. I did some research on Roman togas. Apparently, the way Romans would dress would vary based on, their class. Almost everyone in Rome wore a tunic, which was basically a rectangle from the shoulders down. It could be made of either wool or linen. And upperclassmen would generally wear a toga, which was a piece of wool in the shape of an elongated semicircle that was 6 feet tall and 18 feet long. And it would be decorated based on the class of the wearer. For example, only the emperor could wear the deep purple ones. Well, I don't have a piece of wool that was 18 feet long. That is a bit beyond me at the moment. Even linen is expensive these days. So the way we got around this is I decided to make it out of a gazillion pairs of jeans. I had recently been gifted a gazillion pairs of jeans that a friend of ours had been planning on donating, and so instead of donating to the local Salvation Army, she donated them to us instead to use for costumes, which most of them did get used in this toga. It was an intense process. I had a piece of denim that was, I think it was 8 feet long, 8 or 9. Anyway, what I did was I took that piece of denim and I cut it in half diagonally and sewed the butt ends of the two triangle pieces together so that it was a very elongated triangle that was 16, 17 feet long. And then I filled in the edges with basically the leg pieces of all these pairs of jeans. I trimmed them all so that they were into rectangles and sewed them onto the ends of the larger piece of denim so that it would fill out into a 18 feet long semicircle. And then I used the tops of the jeans, the waistline and the pockets, to create the top of the toga, which, when wrapped around our actor, had a sort of bandolier effect, which was really, really neat. For the tunic that he wore underneath, I took some t-shirts, basically a generic 3-pack of white t-shirts, and I used some old t-shirts to make some trim for the armholes and the neckline. And I sewed two shirts together so that it was a much longer shirt at the very end. And along the sides, I placed what was probably a sundress at one point. It was a turquoise blue triangle, so that at the end of the day, he didn't look like he was wearing a Hanes t-shirt. He looked like he was wearing... It looked like a nightshirt, actually, and I don't think that was inappropriate for the character at the time. And so, the joke of the costume is the character is wearing a traditional Roman tunic and toga, but he's also wearing a t-shirt and jeans. There is no moral of the story today. It's just a very interesting story of what I've been doing, and I thought I'd like to share, and I thought it would be interesting for all of you. But please, stay tuned for the interview. Today I am joined by a very special guest. I am joined by Nix Eraticatus. Now, I have talked about Nix extensively on this channel before, on this podcast before, and now we finally have her with us today. Welcome.
Hello.
So I've talked about your YouTube channels where you walk around the woods. Can you tell me a little bit about what you do there?
Well, originally when I decided to do a YouTube channel, I mostly wanted to do a horror movie review channel, but I don't know if I was just in the right mental place, and I'm making this movie with Evie, which is taking up a lot of our time that we spend working on creative stuff together. So that's kind of been shelved. But in the meantime, to continue momentum, I started doing like vlog type stuff, and it was really just whatever happens to interest me at the time, and trying to tread water and just keep putting something up there that's authentic. And that's really what I've been doing with my YouTube. It happens to be that I like walking in the woods, so a lot of my videos so far have been that. But they won't be just that for the foreseeable future, hopefully.
Okay. I'm not into horror movies, but, the fact that you've got a horror movie review channel, that's pretty rad.
Yeah, I can't wait to get that more off the ground, because I have 101 horror movies I can talk incessantly about. I love horror movies. Even when I'm into, I get focused on different things in my life, different aesthetics and creative projects and whatever, this kind of film, that kind of film. But one constant is horror and morbid, creepy stuff. I've always found that entertaining. I think when I was a kid, it's just the lure of the taboo, but it grew into a genuine love of all things horror and spooky and that sort of thing.
You mentioned in your comment there just a second ago, we recently finished filming your role.
Yes.
In the trial of Hephaestus. Can you tell me a little bit about the character that you played?
I play Erato, the muse of lyric poetry, most specifically erotic poetry. I mean, what can I say about Erato? I mean, it's all there in her name. She exudes eroticism, but she's a playful sort of character. I don't think she takes for her, sex and humor are not two separate things. They're together. Everything is sort of a little bit of a game. Nothing is really meant to be taken too seriously, which is not to say that she can't be serious, but any opportunity to inject humor into the situation, I think she's going to take.
Sexual humor, yeah.
Well, that's what keeps it from being too heavy. Like Kurt Cobain said, with the lights off, it's less dangerous. Same thing with humor.
We're putting in some lines into the film from the poet Sappho, who you could say she was heavily influenced by Erato.
Well, there's a good quote in a documentary I saw. It was a BBC documentary about pagans, and the first episode was called Sexy Beasts, where it was discussing this reputation that pagans have for being oversexed, and you have to look at the way the world was back in the day before Puritanism became standard. If you're holding a penis in your hand, they say, you're going to be laughing. It's funny. Like there's always something funny about sex. But I think that Puritan culture has made it taboo, and it doesn't really need to be that way. Sex is funny.
Okay.
It's not a dignified thing. There's a lot of sweating and grunting and funny faces, and if you try to take the humor out of it, then that's when it becomes sort of icky, and I think that's probably why Christians think that it's kind of icky, because they haven't kept the humor in there.
Except that maybe they're trying to interject the humor back in, but also keeping it taboo.
Perhaps. I think it always feels taboo. I don't care what your background is. It always feels taboo, and there's a lot of psychological reasons for that.
Perhaps. Most of your time spent filming was opposite Moss O'Neill, who played Hermaphroditos. Yeah, we've had Moss on as a guest in a previous episode. Can you tell me a little bit about your experience working with them?
Moss is a delightful person. I enjoyed working with Moss very much. Very shy character, which makes, I'm such a boisterous person naturally. I always felt like I was mentally running over them. You know, like they were always like the deer in the headlights, which is perfect for the character that they play.
It certainly was, yeah.
So it was very easy to just be like right into that role. And I always wanted to stop and be like, okay, I'm doing this for my role. I'm not really trying to scare the crap out of you right now. Sometimes for the purpose of acting, it's better just to keep your mouth shut and tell them after you've wrapped.
Maybe, yeah. Moss had the best faces, didn't they?
Yes.
Yes.
Deer in the headlights, like the role called for. I think we were both cast well.
Yeah, I think you certainly will. What was your favorite thing about working with Moss?
Moss is just a person of sweetness and light, which is missing in the world today, so that was very enjoyable. I don't know, I haven't spent any time not filming with them, so perhaps...
We got to hang out doing the barbecue.
A little bit, yeah. I wasn't there for as much of the barbecue as perhaps some other people present that day were.
But you did get to hang out a little bit.
A little bit.
So, yeah.
I mean, I sense that Moss also has a dark side, as we all do, but I just never saw it.
That is a very sweet thing to say.
I think Moss is that classic photo of the protester putting the flower in the gun? That's Moss, in a nutshell, to me, from my point of view.
Aw. We most recently did some filming with you and Mr. Teej 66 of Mr. Teej 66's movie reviews.
Oh yes, Mr. Teej.
I think you and I have both appeared on TJ's channel.
Probably, yeah. I have.
Yeah, at separate times. I don't think we've appeared there together.
No.
But we've definitely both appeared. What was it like working with him?
As I expected it would be. Remember that I spent some time in TJ's apartment, me and Caden both, when I was pregnant. We spent some time there as an interim in between living situations. So, there's no side of TJ I haven't seen.
I see.
Other than the front side, thank goodness. His front bottom.
Alright.
I don't want anyone to get the wrong impression.
That question did not turn out the way I thought it was going to.
I've seen the state of his toothbrush. I'll say that.
So you did live with him at some point. Like, you and your boyfriend had to stay with him while you were expecting.
Yes. It was for like a couple months. Yeah.
And I think TJ was cast very well in the role, too. Like, he is made of sincerity.
Yes.
Yes. And so, too, is Hephaestus, the role he played. I think it was a very good casting there, both you and Hephaestus, and Erato trying to seduce him and him just being oblivious. That was pretty...
Yeah, everybody was very well cast. I mean, it was not so much acting as embellishing my own persona. And I think that may have been true for TJ as well.
So, your costume, Erato's costume, was the only one for the show that I didn't make.
Yes.
Yes, you designed your own costume. Can you tell me a little bit about your costume design process?
Well, what I wore was not what I wanted to wear, because money is an object, and it is an object which is always out of my reach. But what I originally wanted was to get a white or a nude bodysuit, and then get one of those sort of bodyguarders that's sort of in vogue in the sort of new goth scene, and then put like a drapey piece of fabric over it in the style of, the Greco-Roman goddesses. That was what I wanted to do, but there was no way I was going to come up with the money or the time to make that. So I came up with a shirt that was sort of flowy and wispy like that. And the leggings and the boots are, out of my own closet. Stuff that I might wear if I'm going out, looking for TLM, were I single. That would be the outfit that I wore. I think that's what I originally bought those leggings for. So considering the content of Erato's character, I was like, okay, we'll dress like you're going out with the twat vibe eye. What would you wear?
Okay.
Because, Erato definitely has the TVI. That's a reference to an Iggy Pop song.
Okay.
In case you didn't get it.
I did not, but I live under a rock.
Well, now you know.
Now I know. See, this is why I have friends like you to tell me about things like Iggy Pop.
Iggy Pop is seminal, and I don't mean that he's semen. I mean he's a good musician.
Alright. Tell me about the mask that you had to hold. Like, the character wears two masks at once. One was a purchased, just plain black domino mask, and the other was the boar mask that Evie and I that was actually the only part of the costume that Evie and I made. We made it together.
Can you tell me a little bit about how you felt about the final design, how it felt to hold it, how it felt to wield it?
It was a little awkward to hold. You couldn't hold it by the stick, you had to kind of hold it by the edge of the mask, but that wasn't really a problem. I used it as a prop, as a sort of combination mask and, like fan. There's a long tradition of coquettish women using fans to flirt with, so I kind of used it more in that way than I did as a mask, as per the direction of the director.
Tell me a little bit about any upcoming projects that you're working on.
The next video I have planned is a prosperity spell for my friend Michael. He's someone I have been friends with, well, not close friends with for a super long time, but I've known him since middle school.
I see.
We were in warring factions of the wearing all black people in high school. But, as time goes on and people drop their, affectations and you separate the wheat from the chaff as far as who the actual spooky kids are, we found ourselves sort of standing as two pillars and struck up a conversation right around the time I moved to Oneana and are now friends. Every so often he asks me to do, a little spell, usually a prosperity spell, because that's usually what's on everybody's mind these days. And I've been promising him I'd do one. I haven't done any magic stuff for my channel, even though it's something that's a part of my life, so that's planning on being the next video, is I'm going to do sort of an ambient walkthrough of a spell and put his mojo bag together.
I think you've been talking about this for some time. You've been looking for the perfect stone.
Yes, and I just found it. I went to the fair, one of the fairs around here, found a piece of raw citrine, geode. Citrine is the perfect stone for doing money-related prosperity spells. I pretty much have everything I need now. I just really need to set up the workspace and the camera and get the ambience across.
Definitely looking forward to seeing that one. But I think you're also planning on making an actual movie similar to this one that we're currently doing.
I have a few of those planned. Which one gets my engine revving enough to completion? I'm one of those people who starts projects but doesn't always finish them.
Yeah.
Which is a flaw of mine and many people. But I have quite a few, and really also logistics come into play. Like, of the 5 or 6 stories I'd like to tell, which one can I actually make a film out of?
Yeah, there is that. And consider, though, having been in the trial of Hephaestus, that does give you a certain amount of clout. And you also have the backing of the people that you worked with this particular show. So consider, you do have a support system. You might have a little bit of financial backing if this particular production turns a profit.
Yeah, I have a few different ideas. I'd love to do like a classic horror, the monsters sort of story, which it seems overdone, but it hasn't been done in an art film style successfully in a while. Everything's derivative of something else, and it's really hard to tell a story that hasn't been told, but really, every story has been told since hundreds of years ago. What makes the story unique is, I think, the characters. I think most stories are character-based. It doesn't matter if you've seen the same killer a million times. You haven't seen these people go through it.
Right.
And the variables of 10 different personalities or however many characters you have is what makes it fresh. And what makes a story really affect somebody is the story of the characters. Can they relate to the characters? So really, once you realize that, then it opens your whole world up to telling all those stories that you've already seen that you love so much. You can tell an original story along those same guidelines.
That's really interesting.
I learned everything I know from Stephen King's books.
One of my favorite people has a quote he likes to say. It's that all stories are true and some of them actually happened.
Well, I highly recommend either of Stephen King's books on writing, one of which is actually called On Writing, but there's another one, I can't think of the title now, but it's an older one that he wrote about writing, and he just has really good common sense. He's the hammer and the nails. The details, of putting your own voice together are going to come from everyone else you write, but if you want to learn how to write a good solid story, and specifically even a good horror story, he's a good person to listen to at least get you started on the path. because he gives you all the tools. It's like, when you're in kindergarten and you get those books where you have to draw an A, but there's a dotted line for you?
Yeah.
Stephen King's books about learning how to write are those.
Okay.
And then once you master that, go on to learning about more complicated stuff. But very good. He can give you all the tools you need to write a story within a few days, even if you've never written anything.
Well, that's pretty neat. I remember it took me ages to figure out how handwriting worked because I was so used to writing in that dotted line style.
He just gives you good perspective. He's not going to be your last and only teacher.
Of course.
By any means. But he's good at giving you the confidence when you read it. He can teach you how to be a good writer. Becoming a great writer is all on you.
Right.
And sometimes good is all you need, especially if you're just trying to write a script for a horror movie.
Yeah. Sometimes it has to be filled in by whoever your director happens to be or whoever your actors happen to be.
Right, making a movie is a whole universe, especially when you get on a larger level.
As well we know.
The psychology and the skill of the actors, the director of photography, the cinematographer. Each of them has their own vision. Each of them has their own internal stuff going on that makes its way in. It's just a whole universe of planets spinning. Each person in their role is a planet, and it's the combination of all those people together that makes that universe. Whereas when you're writing a story, it's all coming out of you, and then once you're done, it's all melding with whatever the reader's got going on. That's a much more intimate situation.
That certainly is.
Which I think is why movies are so universal. People think that people don't read because they're lazy. I don't know if that's necessarily always the case. I think it's partially the case. But especially for certain demographics in society, that might just be too intimate an experience. It makes them think a little too deep. It's hard to pull all the visuals for a story out of your own head and then have to sit there alone with it. Whereas in a movie, you're usually with another person, and even if you're not, there's a whole bunch of different psychologies there present with you as you're watching it.
That's deep.
It wasn't meant to be.
There's also the fact that reading takes a lot longer, and even just hearing words aloud, it takes a lot longer to set a scene than just visually seeing it.
True. But once you become a good reader, I mean, I was a little kid when I got through Michael Crichton's The Lost World in a day.
It's impressive. Had you taken any biology or no?
No. I think that also, it's kind of off topic, but that book was the beginning of, what do they call it? Urban decay porn.
Okay.
Or disaster porn. Well, because they land on the island and it's been abandoned. And
Right.
A lot of the book is like, oh, look at this lab that's abandoned and all the vines are growing in. And
Right.
the images that brought up in my head, when later on the internet came about and you could see pictures of that, it was sort of delicious in a way.
Okay. All right. We have been talking for nearly 20 minutes now, and we are just about out of time. I want to thank you very much for joining me today. I really have been looking forward to this interview for quite some time.
Well, I'm glad I could be here.
Please stay tuned for the rest of the show.
Thanks for listening to the Art and Oddities podcast with A.M. Hall. That's our show for today. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go through the grueling task of leaving us a review on whatever platform you're using to listen. I have a new and improved URL to the iTunes page. It's tiny.cc/amhall. Or just Google Art and Oddities Podcast for the player of your choice. The production of this podcast has been provided by Reverend Panic Evlan Bedlam, and without her it would not exist. As stated in the show's intro, we're hoping to upgrade our microphones and other sound equipment. You can help us do that by becoming a patron at patreon.com/panicbedlam. That's PANIKBEDLAM. Evie has also done me the honor of designing some t-shirts for the podcast. Just search for Panic Bedlam on redbubble.com. Links to the Redbubble page and to pages where you can purchase Evie's books and tarot cards will be available in the show notes. Today's guest, Nix Eraticatus, can be found on YouTube. Just search her name there, and I'll also include a link to her channel in the show notes. Mentioned in the show was Mr. Teej66 of Mr. Teej66's Movie Reviews. Mr. Teej is also on YouTube. There will be a link to his channel in the show notes. Our theme music, Doxel Dance in Spacetime, or Belial and His Seven Wives, was composed and performed by Kion Huru Orion, or as I know him, Michael. Thanks, Michael. If you would like to contact the show with comments or suggestions, you can email us at artodditiespodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Facebook. Join our group at facebook.com/groups/oddartpodcast, all one word. Or on Twitter at twitter.com/artodditiespod. Next week, I will once again welcome back friend of the show, Mr. Teej66, to talk about his participation in the film, both on screen and off, and his YouTube channel. That about wraps it up. Remember, the highest form of magic is doing, and expressing yourself is art. This is A.M. Hall, signing off.